Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and I see a lot of good colleagues out there. Let me say in the beginning that it's long been said that global water research, because of its link to global change research, has to be policy relevant. Absolutely has to be policy relevant. Well, then I guess that means that we have to listen to policymakers. And so the question is, what are policymakers saying that's relevant to global water research? Well, that's fairly easy to answer because last year, about 180 countries and about a couple of hundred delegates from these 180 countries came together with a couple of thousand other hanger-ons, myself included, met in Rio and discussed and haggled for days long about what the next development agenda should be. And so what did they come up with that's relevant to us here? Well, these are some of the headlines that you could find out for yourself if you just look at the Rio outcome document. They said that health and population was near the top of the list, food security, green economy, disaster risk reduction, various governance goals, and then, if you follow the document long enough, you'll come to water. I don't want to contradict my good friend Anik here, but at least in my view, water was not really given a prominent role at Rio Plus 20. Now, there's maybe various reasons why not, but I would say my hunch, maybe because I'm an optimist, is because the policymakers expect us to link water in a more integrated way with the development agenda, rather than as a standalone topic. Now, in any event, most of the people here are scientists and we're not policymakers, so are we going to worry about that or not? Well, as it turns out in 2012, it was also an important year for science and science policy interface, because it was also the year, right around the time of Rio Plus 20, in fact, where the global change research organizations reorganized themselves under the leadership of Johan Bergström and others. I had the pleasure of participating in the planning. And we've reorganized ourselves into something called Future Earth, which I think over the coming years is going to be extremely important to the water research community and to other communities in setting the stage for science policy interactions. Now, after some easy years of discussion, we came to three top overarching themes, which should inform the global change research agenda over the coming years. Dynamic planet, global development, and transformations towards sustainability. So on one hand, you have the countries of the world speaking out on what the development agenda should be. On the other hand, you have the global change research organization saying, hey, this is the way global change research should be going. So certainly, those developments must mean something for the next global water research agenda. So let's try and combine those different threads and think just a little bit about what it might mean for the community here. So the first theme from Future Earth is this dynamic planet. The way I would pose that for the global water research community is, how can global water research help us understand changes in the global water system? Now, if you've been around the Global Water System Project for the last 8 years, you may notice that was one of the informing questions already 8 years. And that first point here, what are thresholds and tipping points in the water system, is some unfinished business. I would argue it's still very current, but still, it's something that we've inherited from the initial program of global water research. The second point, however, I would argue comes directly from the development agenda and is very relevant now for the global water research community. How can science support comprehensive early warning, linking with the disaster risk reduction agenda coming out of Rio, and related, of course, to the link between climate, droughts, and floods? Now, I don't have to argue or convince anyone here about the importance of natural risks associated with climate-related events, floods, droughts, but also others. There's lots of statistics around. In 2008, it was estimated that over 20 million people were displaced by sudden onset climate events. In the following year, using another metric, the ISDR from the UN estimated that around 50 million people were affected by extreme weather events. So I think you're familiar with these and other statistics. You may not be so familiar, though, with the fact that we are getting very close as a science community and engineering community to being able to make longer-term early warnings of these disasters or of these climate-related events because of steadily improving medium-term weather forecasting, because of the increasing capabilities of our satellites to collect and process enormous amount of data, because of the efforts of our social scientists who have managed to articulate better and better what the vulnerability of different communities are around the world. Just as an aside, this map on the upper left there is from the country where I live now in Kenya, and it's forecast made in February for the end of the rainfall season in Kenya, which of course has everything to do with whether there's going to be water shortages that year and how the crops are going to do and what the water supply is going to be like. And I can tell you, it's not as robust as you might think. What's interesting, that red area, which is part of where Nairobi is located, where I live, said the second and third week of May, the rain should peter out. And sure enough, I was watching it this year, around the 16th or 17th of May, the rain petered out. So at least one prediction worked out. Anyway, the point I'd like to make is that we do have the potential now to make a leap using science and the capability to make early warning, longer-term early warnings of these disasters. It's going to take physical science to be working more on the front end of these early warnings, the part that have to do with meteorology and hydrology. They need to be able to now link these longer-term meteorological forecasts with the hydrologic and water supply models so that we can come up with decent estimates months in advance about the status of water shortages or perhaps an increased frequency of floods. But at the same time, while we need the physical scientists, we also vitally need the social scientists to work on the back end of these early warning systems, which basically have been neglected up to now. That's the part that has to do with the delivery and uptake of these warnings. And there, the social scientists, we need them to work on problems like, can you describe for us the local vulnerabilities due to different rapid onset events? Can you prescribe the kind of institutions that we need for preparedness? I think the fact of the matter is, if we make progress, if the global water research community makes progress, both in the physical science and the social science, having to do with early warning, we can, within a number of years, within a few years, be responsible for saving the suffering of literally millions of people each year. Let me move on to the second theme, coming from the Future Earth themes, namely global development. I would phrase it as, how can global water research address critical development issues? Which ones I would put on the list? Also, Mr. Klaus said that the German community is already dealing with some of these issues: water and health, water and food security, water and the green economy. We could, and many of us are going to spend the rest of the day and the rest of this conference talking about the details of this. Let me just pose one idea here, one set of issues that compresses actually many of these development issues into a water issue, which is called the Global Water Quality Challenge, meaning the increasing water pollution in developing countries that's coming up as a side effect of development and having increasing impacts, but also the ongoing water pollution in developed countries caused primarily by chemical contamination. Now, you might think that water quality, you may have the opinion that water quality is more of a local issue, and certainly it has important local aspects. But I would argue that it has important global aspects that the global water research community should take into account. First of all, excuse me, it has global drivers. Climate change, for example, is leading to increasing temperatures in freshwater ecosystems throughout the entire world. The higher the temperature of these systems, the less they can absorb and dissolve oxygen, and the greater the ecosystem impacts. The Water Quality Challenge also has large-scale aspects, global impacts. Think about the 205 hypoxic zones along the coastal areas of our continents right now. The ones that are linked, almost primarily linked, almost all of them are linked to water pollution in inland waters finding its way to the coastal zone, creating eutrophication problems. And think of the global institutions that have a global reach, the donor organizations, the water companies, etc., whose water supply plans and development projects will have a profound influence on water quality around the world. Now, the Water Quality Challenge, I would argue, is also a central development issue, because as water pollution increases in developing countries, it is already increasing health risks for those living in developing countries still having a lot of contact with surface waters. It's certainly a major food security issue, because practically all of the inland fishery production is in developing countries, and nearly 3 billion people in the world depend on fisheries, marine and inland fisheries, for a substantial amount of the protein in their diets. And it's also an economic issue. If you just account for the worth of the fishery industry in just the inland fisheries and just in the tropics, it amounts to around $6 billion per year. And of course, it also offers a livelihood for millions of people in developing countries. So what can the global water research community do about it? I would say that there's a huge agenda now. We're almost in the dark ages when it has to do with the water quality situation in the world. Of course, we made tremendous progress in Europe and North America, Australia, developed countries, but still, I would argue, in 3/4 of the world, we don't understand the situation. We need to know about what the emission discharges are of various water pollutants. We need to analyze the health risks from increasing water pollution. We need to articulate in a much better way the link between water quality, fisheries, and food security in developing countries. There's a whole host of governance issues which we don't fully understand. What are the correct regulatory frameworks, for example, in developing countries that will be effective in water quality management? Now, the UN's trying to do its part, I'm happy to say, in trying to bring more understanding and bring together the scientific community. We've launched something called the World Water Quality Assessment. It's being led by, or it's being coordinated by UNEP on behalf of UN Water, and also UNEP is helping to initiate an effort to develop guidelines equivalent to the water quality guidelines for drinking water, but this time for ecosystems, to serve as targets and guidelines for decision makers to figure out what targets should be for water quality management. And I'm happy that we're working with UN University and GWSP on these guidelines. So I only have time to bring up the third now theme and its linkage to development. And this third theme from Future Earth is called Transformations Towards Sustainability, which I would articulate as how can global water research show the way to a sustainable future? And here let me just talk about 3 things very briefly. First of all, in coming up with a vision of the sustainable future, I think we urgently need creative scenarios. They need to be richer and broader in scope than the scenarios we've done up to now. They have to involve water availability and water quality. They have to involve a much richer and much wider sense of what the drivers are and the governance aspects of changes in water quality into the future. Secondly, the second point I want to bring up is what I call the water efficiency question. I think we've only done a partly good job in identifying the critical role that water efficiency plays in the water economy and in providing enough water for all. In my view, I think we've been taking way too much of a piecemeal approach. I think we've done very good work in looking at the agricultural sector and trying to boost water efficiency. I think we all know that water conservation works in a household and we can make it very efficient. But I think what we need to do also, over and above those efforts, is to take a whole system view. You know, the people working on industrial metabolism have something to offer to us, and they look at metal flows through the economies, and they look at energy flows through the economies. If we take this whole system view, I'm convinced that we can understand much better where the water inefficiencies are in the whole water economy, the anthropogenic and natural economy. It's just one of many tasks that I think we need to take on that could fall under this rubric of showing the way to a sustainable future. And finally, coming out of Rio, as well as many other things out of Rio, the countries of the world have told us that now we're going to develop sustainable development goals. Good luck to us. I think it's going to keep 50% of the UN employed and out of trouble or in trouble over the next 3 years until 2015. And certainly the issue of where water fits into the SDGs, we're going to have to debate in a very lively way over the next 4 days. And I don't have time to get into it now. I'm not convinced myself whether there should be a water SDG, a water goal with subsidiary targets, or whether water should be a target under other sustainable development goals. Anyway, I'll just put that out there. Maybe I've already caused a controversy, and I think that would be good. But the point I'd like to make here is, let's look beyond 2015. These goals will be adopted in 2015, and I would like to raise the issue here of the fact of the global water research community has an important contribution to make in the monitoring and compliance of these goals. In my view, my personal opinion, I think with the Millennium Development Goals, we kind of dropped the ball. I think we had a lot more to offer with our global observation systems. We're building up field programs with our modeling technology. We had more to offer to the monitoring and compliance of the Millennium Development Goals, and maybe they would have been further along if we had been involved. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's think about already, we have 2 or 3 years to plan. How will the global water research community help out the world community in monitoring the compliance and progress to these new SDGs? Just one of many tasks that we're faced with. So let me sum up now and say that in closing, I think it's possible. No, let me put it this way. I think it's imperative that we incorporate the Rio +20 development agenda and the Future Earth prescription of research themes or suggested research themes into the next global water research agenda. I think that it'll help us formulate questions like, how can global water research help us understand the changes in the global water system? How can this research help us address the critical development challenges that we're faced with? How can it show us the way to a sustainable future? Now, what I'm not saying is that the global water research community should become some kind of consulting arm to the development banks. But I am saying, and I hope I'm pretty clear about my message, that I really think that our research agenda needs to be more development-oriented. Because after all, it still remains that around 20% of world population holds on to more than 75% of the world's riches by any number of different metrics. And the other 80% want their fair share of well-being and the world's riches, and they deserve that fair share. So I say that our task is to work with that 80% and to show them how we can meet development needs of the world and at the same time conserve the integrity of the global water system. Thank you very much for your attention.